All right, there we go. Hello everyone, how's it going? Team here, and this is BxJS Weekly, episode 140, bringing you all the best JavaScript news of the week in a podcast form. And yeah, we got some stuff today. Again, I'm not even sure what's going on, but there hasn't been that much stuff lately. But yeah, we do have quite a few articles that are pretty cool this time around. So let's get cracking right away. As usual, the first section of the week is getting started. We got 5 articles here, and some of those are really good. Starting with 3x smaller Lambda artifacts by removing junk from Node modules. So this one is essentially a tutorial guiding you through the things you can do to decrease your Node module size for deployments on Lambda systems. I mean, in this specific case, the author talks about Amazon Web Services, but as you know, this is a thing that is available basically in most, platforms, right? So there's Azure functions, there's Google functions, whatever. I think most of them have them now. And more often than not, you want your function to be as small as possible, right? And using stuff in your project, well, you're obviously going to use some stuff like Amazon Web Services SDK, for example, and so on and so forth. And most of those have some dev dependencies that you typically don't need. Then you have the cache, then you have the typings, and you can throw all of that away to decrease your zip size almost by 3 times in the case of the author, which is quite convenient. So if you're working or thinking of working with Lambda functions and wanted to optimize your code size, do check this tutorial out. It's pretty short, but pretty good. Okay, continuing, we got React context without context using XState. This is sort of a very brief tutorial on how to use XState to manage your state with React. Basically, nothing super complex or super fancy here. It does show the use case with a basic authentication, the use auth hook that this is from their blog basically. Yeah, it's a nice tutorial. XState is an amazing library and it works really well with React. So if you were curious on how exactly to use XState with React, do check this one out. It's a pretty decent introduction. Continuing, we got improving JavaScript performance with GPU.js. This is a pretty nice write-up on the GPU.js. I've never heard about it. It's general purpose programming based on the GPU, basically. This one is specifically the library written for JavaScript that allows you to do various math stuff on GPU from JavaScript, which works surprisingly well, actually. And yeah, this article basically explains what GPU.js is, what GPU approach is, how does it work, and how do you get started in a very simple manner. Basically, there's nothing, too complex in here. But as an intro and tutorial, this is a really good one. So if you are interested in the topic, do absolutely check it out. Hey Pego, welcome to the stream. All right, continuing, we got transform your website into a progressive web app. A really good write-up that essentially guides you through all the steps you need to take to transform your existing website into a progressive web app. Starting from manifest.json to service workers to different icons, configs, whatever. Basically everything you can imagine that you have to do when you are converting, or I guess creating a new web app from a progressive web app from scratch is here. So if you have a website and you wanted to convert it to progressive web app and you didn't know how, then this guide is absolutely for you. It's pretty long, pretty extensive, and covers, I think, pretty much everything you gotta know about that. So there you go. Okay, last thing we got here is the article titled GitHub Actions to Securely Publish NPM Packages. And just as it sounds, it's basically talking about setting up your Node.js project that uses GitHub Actions to publish your NPM package to NPM while also using two-factor authentication and all that kind of stuff. If you didn't know, the NPM finally recently, I think it was like a month ago or something, they finally added a way to generate specific CI tokens while you have 2FA enabled, so that you don't have basically any risk of or I guess you don't, not that you don't have the risk, you actually minimize the risk, right, of breaching and someone stealing your token and stuff like this. So this article basically does a good job of outlining how that all works, how to set it up, and what exactly do you need to do to publish your package from GitHub Actions, which is super convenient, by the way. So if you're not doing it, you should be. Okay, that's it for the getting started section. Now we are getting to the articles and news. We do have some cool stuff here as well, starting with how Netflix scales its API with GraphQL Federation, part 1. So this is a multi-part blog that talks about the query federation, in this case specifically within GraphQL. So Netflix seems to have adopted the GraphQL quite heavily, and they have some really cool use cases here. So this article specifically talks about the Studio API that works with sort of the data they have on movies, on studios, on people, talent, and so on and so forth. And how they basically, because all of that data is distributed, right, federated, so they have to actually support federated querying. And they need to scale that, what is more important. And there's like a whole story in here, how they first just did it in a stupid, straightforward way. And obviously, you know, they encountered problems with performance. The more data they had, the more people that used it, the more load there was, and so on and so forth. And how they approached the sort of solving the issue of performance, the federation, and all that kind of stuff. It's a fascinating write-up, really, really cool stuff. I guess normally most of people won't actually have to deal with that, but if you are working on either extremely federated data sources or, you know, the GraphQL query, what do you call it? I mean, yeah, federation is basically the word, right? So if you're working with any of that, absolutely do read through it. There's some really cool stuff. Again, if you have even slightest interest in the kind of use cases GraphQL can support, I would recommend reading through that as well, because it is really, really cool. Like, it's fascinating to see the level of federation they have in some of those things. So as far as I understood from this article, they not just fetch different entities from different services, but they actually have services for specific properties of some entities. Like the movie title is fetched from the movie service, the movie production is fetched from the production service, and so on and so forth, which is just kind of crazy when you think about it. But as far as I know, that, you know, the using separate resolvers for separate fields is actually considered to be a good practice in GraphQL in terms of optimizing for the performance. But anyway, let's not dive into that. Anyway, if you are interested in GraphQL Federation, absolutely do read through. It's an amazing article and a very well written one. Okay, continuing, we got another article from the Puppeteer team. It's titled Puppetaria, Accessibility First Puppeteer Scripts. And it deep dives into a new addition to the Puppeteer API, which is the new ARIA selectors. So, you know, when you basically query the page, you typically use CSS selectors that work okay-ish, right? But sometimes you want to select stuff in a more fine-grained manner, I guess. So sometimes you just don't have that working selector for like a submit button. But there is a way to do that, most likely with ARIA and accessibility selectors. And this is exactly what the new API introduces. So basically will allow you to query stuff by the accessibility attributes, I guess. ARIA selectors is what they are calling them. And it actually looks really cool. So the the testing library, which includes the React testing library, actually used that approach to querying the elements, and it works amazingly well. Like, it literally, it forces you as a developer to think in terms of accessibility, because this is what you're going to use during the testing, for example, which I really love, to be honest. And yeah, there's also some additional technical details in here, and it actually seems like it has some benefit in terms of the performance, because it takes less time to query the DOM this way rather than, you know, querying by CSS selectors. So if you're curious, do check out the write-up. It's actually pretty good. Pretty cool to see something like this land natively, essentially, in Puppeteer itself. So yeah, if you're interested, check the article out. Let me have a look at the chat. What are your thoughts on using React Query Apollo Client or SVR? How does it scale with Redux or MobX? So usually, like, I haven't used a React Query. I did use Apollo Client and I did use SVR, but as far as I understand, all three of those have absolutely different use cases. And in case of Apollo Client, you don't usually need to use any other state management. You can literally just use Apollo Client itself and local queries for state management. SVR is super handy for data fetching. I mean, you depending on the use case, you probably still will need some state management somewhere. But I've used it in a very small project, so I don't really have anything to say about that. Because I haven't worked with SVR and Redux or MobX. I haven't worked with MobX at all, to be honest. And React Query is something I haven't tried to this date, so we're, cannot say anything here. Anyway, continuing, we got another article. Now, this one is weird, at least for me. So the article is titled Next.js and Google Best Practices for Images, How It Relates to Web Standards. The more I think about this article, the weirder it gets. So essentially, the article here is talking about the Next.js version 10 that was presented a week ago, I believe, right? And the new image component that they have in Next.js that essentially is drop-in replacement for EMG tag and sort of has all the best practices like lazy loading and prefetching and whatever, and results in, better performance and faster websites. And it was built together by the Next.js people, or Versal people, I guess, and Google people, which is amazing, to be honest. Now, the author of the article here, for whatever reason, complains that it's bad that we have a tag or a component within the framework, so it's a framework component that follows best practices, and that somehow it's bad for the web. And the more I think about it, when I say that out loud, it sounds even more ridiculous, because it's not a web standard. It's just one specific framework, one specific component within one specific framework. How is it bad for web? I don't get this reasoning. Like, I get that, yeah, maybe if even like there's no if here. It's just it doesn't make any sense. Even more so when you look at the component and when you look at the there was quite a discussion of this on Twitter, and the authors of the Next.js had to defend it, which sounds ridiculous. Image component is built upon web standards. It uses the same EMG tag, right? It's just like it's so weird. I don't know why this exists, to be honest. For some reason, the author brings up the WebP here, and I've been trying to wrap my head around this article for the past couple of days, and I just can't come up with a valid reason to complain about a component within a framework that basically makes it easier for developers to provide faster websites. Like, it has literally nothing to do with web standards, and I'm not sure how it can hurt the web. And this is like, if you're curious, do check out the article, though. I mean, I wouldn't say that, that some of the points are absolutely valid here. Again, I'm not convinced by the points about the WebP, that is, it's bad and everything, because it's literally just another format for images. It's open format, and it performs better than PNG or JPEG. Again, I'm not defending Google. They are known to be, doing some pretty crappy things, to be honest. Like, the stuff they did with Chrome to just basically force things to be converted into web standards purely because they could is not exactly perfect. But this case is it's just ridiculous, in my opinion. I honestly don't know why I covered this article. It's just so ridiculous that you know what, let's just continue. Anyway. The next article we got here is Warp, improved JS performance in Firefox 83. So we finally got the Warp engine enabled in SpiderMonkey in Firefox 83 by default. This is the new JIT, basically a bunch of JIT compiler changes that should speed up and improve the performance as well as the memory consumption of Firefox. And hopefully bring it on par with Chromium, which, it's kind of will be interesting to see some benchmarks. Because Firefox, while it's a very nice browser and has some very cool features, it was lagging behind Chrome quite significantly in terms of the pure JavaScript performance, which is, is just nice to have everything super fast, right? And Warp seems like a really good first step. They boast some pretty good performance improvements, so like up to 20 performance improvements, up to 20% improvement on Google Docs load time, 10 to 12% faster speedometer benchmark, and then 8% less memory usage, which is super impressive considering Firefox is already very lean on memory in comparison to Chrome. So yes, if you are curious about more technical details, there's a ton of them in the article. So if you're interested in all that kind of nitty gritty of the JIT and optimizations the warp is applying, do check it out. I think we covered a few articles from Mozilla Tim before on Cache IR specifically, if I remember correctly. But this is some really exciting stuff. Hey Manuel, welcome to the stream. All right, continuing, the last article we got here for today is 10 insights from adopting TypeScript at scale. So this is an article from the Rob Palmer, who's a JavaScript infrastructure and tooling lead at Bloomberg and also co-chair of TC39. And there is some really cool stuff in here. Like I am, again, I'm not exactly a TypeScript guy, as you might know, and I still have my gripes with TypeScript. But this article does an incredible job of outlining all the things you have to keep in mind and all the caveats that you might encounter while migrating existing code base to TypeScript. And, that existing code base is non-trivial and relatively large. There's like a ton of stuff here, and all of that is amazing. So if you are using TypeScript or considering using TypeScript, absolutely do take out like 20 minutes and just sit and read through all of that, because this article is just gold, basically. That's all I have to say about it. Again, as a non-TypeScript guy, I cannot really address any of the stuff that is mentioned here, but considering who the author is, I'm pretty sure it's going to be pretty good. Right, that's it for the articles and news. Now we are coming to the tips, tricks, and bit-sized awesomeness, starting with the new search engine for JS operators. So essentially, it's this thing that allows you to look up any of the JS operator syntax in a really straightforward manner and see what exactly that does. So if you are just starting with JavaScript and you don't know what some of those symbols do when you see them in code, like for example, a res spread operator, like a lot of people who just start out, they're like, what the hell is this, right? And it might be non-trivial to Google that stuff. Again, it can be solved in most cases when you know what you're doing with the Google engine, with doing MDN and then just using the quotes, for example, right? But that's not trivial as well. This search engine essentially trivializes this and shows you some nice examples, some nice descriptions of what the operator is, how it works, and how exactly you use it. So this is pretty invaluable, in my opinion, for people who just start out or come to JavaScript from a different language. Also, I absolutely hate the binary operators, the bitwise operators, because it always takes me ages to understand them. But anyway, it's really cool. So if you are interested, do check out operator lookup. Right, next thing we got here is intent to remove from the Blink developers HTTP2 and gQUIC server push. So Blink is probably gonna remove the server push ability from HTTP2 and gQUIC protocols, which is quite interesting, because a lot of people were saying that, the server push is basically gonna replace the need for WebSockets and everything and blah, blah, blah. But apparently, according to the, so there's a pretty big write-up here from the Blink team, as well as some pretty long discussion on there's quite a lot of input from the people who actually used the HTTP2 push in production. There was also pretty big discussion on Hacker News on, the whole situation. So the gist is that HTTP2 as well as gQUIC protocol, so gQUIC is the non-standard protocol that is used by Google, Akamai, and Lightspeed. Apparently, it's sort of the predecessor of the HTTP3 that we're getting soonish, or I think it already works in most of the browsers, actually. So the idea is that they both support this push that can be initiated by the server, so server can actually push something to the client. The problem is that, number one, it is incredibly hard to implement, and that is supported by a ton of people in the comments saying they're like, hey, we tried to do this, and it's just a huge pain in the ass, and there's like an easier ways of doing it with WebSockets or, well, basically anything else. And number two, the statistics they have is just bonkers. Like, there is a very, very tiny amount of people and services over all internet in Chrome. So this is statistics from Chrome, right? That ever even utilize push at all. So it's like gQUIC was 1 out of 1.2 million connections. This is the 1 out of 1.2 million connections that used any push streams within gQUIC, which is like nobody uses it. So they're like, yeah, okay, so let's just deprecate it. So people started with like, what about web standards? And turns out that actually HTTP2 protocol, while it has the push defined in the standard says that it's up to the specific implementation and it's optional feature that might not be implemented. So it's perfectly fine to deprecate this. But it is fascinating that even though this exists, it's so complex that nobody basically uses it. Again, if you're curious, do look through the discussion. There's some pretty cool stuff in here. And I remember reading the discussion on the Hacker News, and people were like, well, we did this in our company, and we had so much pain with basically making Safari work with it, because as far as I know, Safari still doesn't fully support that we just decided to basically drop it, which was like, yeah, okay, that sounds like Safari, all right. It's like Safari is literally new Internet Explorer 8. It's just very painful. But anyway, last thing we got here is this, I would say hilarious, but it's hilarious and sad at the same time. The issue opened on the Faker.js repository titled "No More Free Work from Marak, Pay Me or Fork This." So Marak is the maintainer and creator of the Faker.js, which is pretty popular, like really popular JS library for generating realistic fake data in Node and browser that is quite widely used for, well, basically polyfilling or, creating data. And as far as I understood, like he had some really bad things happen to him, like his house burned down and then people found some hardware in there. And his neighbors literally were complaining that he's like a new Unabomber or something because people are crazy, even though he had like some burnt Raspberry Pis in there. This is at least the gist I understood from the news, which was like, come on, man. It's just like... And yeah, because of that, he was like, fuck it. I'm no longer going to maintain this library because I'm not getting paid for that. There's 27,000 stars and it is widely used. Like if you look at the statistics, it's probably going to be insane. And I'm guessing he's not earning anything from that, or, probably not even enough to sustain himself, even though it is used by the Fortune 500 companies. And yeah, the guy had enough. And I feel like, okay, in this case, he sort of, I guess, broke after all this bad stuff happening to him. I mean, it's 2020. But, looking at open source is just a matter of time, right? So all the people who do things for free, unless they are supported by the company they work for, like React and Facebook, right? Or Puppeteer and Google, this is going to inevitably happen to all the open source libraries we have that are maintained or created by just one person. And there is no way around it. And I don't know if anyone, I don't think anyone still figured out a way to sustain them. Like the sponsor button is nice and everything, but this doesn't really work good enough, basically, right? Because it's still anyway, this is like a discussion for a completely different time. And yeah, I'm wondering if we're going to see the open source solved, or the open source funding, I guess, solved within the next 10 years, or if we're just going to see the open source break in the next 10 years. It's going to be interesting to observe. Anyway, that's it for the tips, tricks, and bit-sized awesomeness. Now we're coming to the releases. We got 3 of them here today, starting with the Socket.io version 3, the new release that basically... it's really cool that they basically address why Socket.io in 2020 and list all the cool features like auto reconnection, the room namespacing and all that kind of stuff that they support, as well as the ecosystem in other languages if you need those. But Socket.io still remains a really cool library, and well, they had this fallback to HTTP polling that probably is no longer needed in 2020. The other features it has are still really, really good, and the new version seems really nice. So if you are using Socket.io, make sure to upgrade. If you are not using it, well, do check it out. Maybe this is the library that you really needed for your WebSocket needs, because it does have some really cool features. All right. Next release we got here is Node.js 15.2, the current version. The highlight of this release is the support for abort signals in write file and read file. So the abort signals were just added to Node in version 15. We're finally seeing them being added to the native API, which is super cool, which means you can now abort reading and writing of files. Again, it's probably a very niche, it's not something you would use too frequently unless you're working with incredibly large files. But it is super nice that you can actually do that now. Okay, continuing, we got version 11 of Angular. Can't really say much, haven't been using Angular in years now, but if you are using Angular, do check out the release notes. Seems like a pretty good, another, major release. As usual, they have a pretty straightforward migration path and everything, so yeah, I guess good for the Angular folks. Right, and the last release we got here for today is Chakra-UI React version 1. So it's finally the first stable release of Chakra-UI, even though before that it was pretty stable as well, I'd say. I'm not sure why they released 1.0 just now. But it's a really, really nice user interface library for React with, themes and super slick design and very nice way to customize it, and a whole ton of different components. So if you are looking at doing things in React and you don't want to design your own element system, then do check this one out. It's actually really damn good. So there you go. All right, that's it for the releases. Now we're coming to the libs and demos. We don't have that many of them today for whatever reason, but some are pretty cool. Starting with mammoth-cli. So this is actually Mammoth tools set. This is a type-safe query builder built in TypeScript with some nice features. I mean, it's like I'm not a TypeScript guy, so I'm not sure what the advantages here over something like Bookshelf or Type ORM, for example, which is also typed, by the way. But anyway, there's the more the merrier, basically. So if you're working with Postgres and you wanted a query builder for TypeScript, do check this one out. This seems like a solid project. Continuing, we got sirdb, a Git diffable JSON database on the file system. So it's basically just, the file system, the JSON files, and it basically built in a way to allow you to Git diff it in a nice manner, which is a pretty neat feature, to be honest. What I am disappointed about is that it doesn't have the please method, which, Sir database should have Sir please method. I don't care what it's going to do, but it should be there. I know it's stupid, but it would be absolutely a nice meme. Anyway, if you were looking for a JSON database, file-based database that are also built in Git diffable way, I guess there are limited use cases for this, but they exist. Do check Sir out. It actually looks quite nice. Continuing, got V8 perf. This is a nodes and resources related to V8 and Node.js performance. So if you ever wanted to deep dive into the performance underneath the V8 hood, this has a really nice collection of different articles and documents and source code and whatever, basically anything related to it. So do check this one out. Another thing we got here is protocore, basically binary protocol structures in Node.js in a pretty straightforward way. So you specify the schema, then you build the object from that schema, and then it will serialize it into a binary object that is smaller and easier to transfer over the web if you have this kind of use cases. Again, if you don't know why you would need that, you probably don't need that, and just using JSON is perfectly fine. But if you are working in environments that require something like this, do check this one out. Seems pretty cool. Next thing we got here is N8N. I honestly not sure how to correctly read that, but this is an open source extendable workflow automation that looks absolutely gorgeous. So if you needed a tool for automating data and syncing data between 90 plus apps and designing powerful custom integrations by just using drag and drop components, essentially, this is looking really, really nice. So it seems like basically the if this then that on steroids and in a more workflowy manner, I guess, rather than just a simple integration. And it's all purely open source and on GitHub. So, if you are curious to check it out. What is the license actually? It is common close, I think it's Apache or something, right? Yes, it's Apache v2. So it's even very, very permissive, which is super neat. So if you are curious, do check this one out. Let me have a look at the chat. Why is the migration needed in relation-based DBs? What if I don't keep track of each migration files? Well, migration is needed because when you change the schema, you have to update your database to the new schema, right? And this is what the migration does. because it's not like in MongoDB when you added a key and you basically don't care if it's in database or not. You just have to account for the null values, right? And that's it. In relational DB, that won't work because you have to update the tables physically. So this is kind of the point of it. Hi, Tim. Well, to develop something like this, there's something called Reta.js. Reta.js, let me have a look at that. I think I've heard about it, but no, but Reta, so this is visual programming, right? I think I already covered it on podcast, but this allows you to build those kind of UIs. What the N8N does is gives you the full platform where you can drag and drop components to build functioning workflows. So in this example, you can see basically there's a GitHub trigger, and whenever something happens on GitHub, if there is a condition that basically checks something, and then either you get basically two different messages on Slack. So this is a full-on visual programming. This is an environment for programming. So it's not just the visual builder, it's the full platform. Like it's literally workflow automation, which is super cool. So I should probably start that. So do check this one out. Reta.js, I guess they probably use something like Reta.js. More like Node-RED. Node-RED. I think Node-RED was pretty much... Yeah, so Node-RED is sort of aims to be the general programming thing. So sort of the visual programming platform. And this is more of a automation tool. So it has a more limited use cases, right? So where the Node-RED aims to be the sort of visual programming where you can do anything you want, this aims to be more of, hey, if this thing happens, do that, right? So it's like triggers and reactions to them, basically, with some minor logic in between. But yeah, kind of like that. I was speaking about UI. Yeah, UI, I mean, I'm guessing they'll probably use something like the Reta.js or something similar because it looks... We can check the package JSON. This is the cool thing about the open source, right? You can just be like, hey, what did they actually use to build that? So they use Vue.js to build the front end. And there is Vue Prism Editor, TSLint, Quill, Prism.js, Normalizeville, Node.js, JS Hint. I think they use JS Plum to do that. I think this is the... Yeah, so JS Plum is... it's similar-ish library to Reta.js, but, you know, it's just... I think it's older and has way more plugins and features that you can do with it, basically. It's very fancy. I used it a couple of times. So yes, they use JS Plum, but it's pretty similar to that. But anyway, if you do think that this is cool, do check it out. Okay, continuing, we got GraphQL-lazyloader, a GraphQL directive that adds object-level data resolvers. I have had no time to dig into it, but the premise seems pretty cool. So I think I already mentioned this today, but the gist is that there was a pretty big write-up from the PayPal people that was titled GraphQL Resolvers Best Practices from 2018. And what they argued is that essentially you want to write resolvers not per type, as in, you know, the person has a resolver that gets all the data, but actually per field, because then you don't overfetch, especially when you do like very complex stuff. And setting up it manually is, well, quite annoying, right? Because that means you have to like write resolvers for each field, and in some cases, it obviously works perfectly fine when you're like, you have the different things that, well, when you can optimize per field basis, let's put it this way. But most of the times you just query your database, get a specific name and just return it. And it seems like this GraphQL-lazyloader does exactly this. So you just pass it the lazy load function to your resolvers, and it will automatically generate the specific field properties that will do this thing, and then just extract and return one property, which again, I'm not sure is super as beneficial as writing your separate resolvers, but seems interesting. So if you're working with GraphQL, do check this one out. Let me have a look at the chat. I'll be excited if I have a graphical tool for graffiti. I mean, what would it do? Like, there's plenty of GraphQL related tools out there already, so I'm not sure what would graffiti specific tool would be. Can be like Hasura, but for MongoDB, and would also be very nice to be able to write custom resolvers easily, unlike Hasura. I mean, the whole point of Graffiti is that it basically just abstracts away a few libraries and allows you to write your own stuff. So I'm not sure it will work that well. Hey, Slavko, welcome to the stream. All right. Last thing we got here for today is Notion clone. This is quite literally a clone of Notion, albeit a very, very simple one. So you have a nice demo. Allows you to do this whole slash thing with, heading, hello, and then subheading. Yes, very simple, very straightforward. Got the blocks. Can rearrange them if you want to. I believe, the whole blocking and stuff works. Very snappy, very nicely written. Obviously, way less. How do you put it? Way less feature rich than Notion, because Notion has been around for quite some time and they have quite a bit of funding behind it. But it's a very nice demo of how do you build something like Notion. And yeah, so if you are curious how to build an editor like this, do check this one out. This one is built using React, Next, and Express with MongoDB and Mongoose as a backend. Seems like a very nice editor. So if you were looking for, I guess, a lightweighter Notion, do check this one out. Right, that's actually it from my side. So if you guys have any questions or suggestions, now is the time to throw them into the chat. If no, then we can just wrap it up here. While you're thinking on questions, you can, as usual, find all the links on GitHub or on bxjs.dev. You can follow me on Twitter. You can join our Discord server to chat about any of that. As usual, if you're watching the VOD of this, you can leave any comments in the comment section on YouTube. I will be more than happy to answer them. You can follow my Telegram channel where I collect all the links over the week. Some of them don't actually make it into the podcast itself. So if you're curious about the unfiltered stream, you can do it there. And I think that's basically it from my side. So yes, I think that covers it. All right, I'll give you a couple more seconds to think about the questions. Meanwhile, anything else I can say? No, I mean, you can also listen to this podcast in audio form if you like to. It's on Anchor, iTunes, and I think Anchor basically distributes it to just about any other podcasting platforms. So just search for BxJS Weekly and you should find it there. Right, doesn't seem like we have any more questions or suggestions. So thank you guys very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Yeah. That's basically it from my side. Yes, I'm, doing good, and we're going to be continuing with the Next.js task manager thingy next week, probably even on Monday, so we're going to see how that goes time-wise, but yeah. Do you know Daniel Schiffman? He makes very interesting creative coding tutorials and experiments that can inspire junior developers. No, I don't really know him, but, or maybe I know he's... Wait a second. Coding train. I don't think I do. No, I don't think I have ever seen him. Discord bots. Nope, don't know this guy. Twitter, GitHub. Maybe, wait a second. Maybe I follow him on Twitter or GitHub or something. Not qualified for any of this. That's a great bio. No, don't know him, but, I mean, if he inspires junior devs, that's great. All the more power to him. So if you are curious about the creative coding tutorials, do check out Daniel Schiffman. Seems like a cool stuff. Anyway, I think let's just wrap it up here for today. So thank you guys once more very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. I hope you enjoyed the stream. Again, join our Discord to chat about any of that. And I see you next week for coding, as I said, probably Monday if I have enough time. We're going to see about that. Right. Again, have an awesome rest of the weekend or rest of the week if you're watching the VOD of this. And